Awesome. Thanks everyone for joining us in our Duke MBA Tech Club event today. Can everyone hear me okay? Awesome. Also want to thank our panelists today, Adrian and Bradley, for joining us. Really excited to hear from you. We're going to go ahead and start our meeting. Um, and just wanted to start off with a quick introduction of our panelists. So first we'll start with Bradley Jacobs, the founder and CEO of Mylance. And a quick background on Bradley. Bradley got his BSc here from Duke in mechanical engineering. And so, we have our very own Dookie with us. I was always excited to have our people from our community talk to us today about what they're doing in their startups and their companies. From 2014 to 2018, Bradley worked for Uber and various parts of their business. First in Uber Rides, helping to grow their North Carolina market to over 100 million in revenue yearly. And then worked in Uber Eats, launching their business actually in Milan, Italy, and also in Miami, Florida, which is pretty exciting. And then finished off at Uber, working as the head of carrier operations for Uber Freight. And then starting in 2018, I'm kind of just guessing this timeline, Bradley, so you can correct me if I'm wrong, but Bradley started freelancing, working around 25 hours a week at $250 an hour. And so you can see that's a lifestyle that we all wish we had, but it was part of the impetus of eventually in 2019 when Bradley founded Mylance, a company that's focused on empowering freelancers. And they're also part of they also were part of a On Deck Fellowship, which is exciting and love to hear more about later in the meeting. And then a fun fact: Bradley is a member of the Duke Golf Club, and so maybe us FUCO students are always out there at the WaDuke, so maybe one day we'll cross paths, or maybe not so much recently since we're in the pandemic, but hopefully sometime in the future. Great. And then we also have Adrian Albus. And just a side note, I did a mentor study with Adrian this past summer, and it honestly is one of the greatest experiences I've had thus far in business school. So super excited to have Adrian as part of our panel today. Adrian was part of the FUCO Wemba cohort in 2010, 2011. And so again, great to have our very own Duke community represented in our panel. And then also Adrian was in management consulting for 4 years, working at Booz Allen Hamilton and their decision analytics group. And then from 2014 to 2012 to 2014, Adrian was a corporate strategy manager at Conagra. And then also, fun fact, Adrian was also a professor at the University of Nebraska at this time, teaching business administration. And then Adrian left the corporate world and came and joined the startups or tech scene, working as a director of business innovation and strategy at Zipcar, and was crucial. I was saying key and crucial, and it came out crucial. He was key and crucial in their collaboration with Avis. And then recently, Adrian was the COO at Zagster, which started off as a bike sharing company and eventually managed fleets for micromobility companies. And Zagster was acquired earlier this year. And now Adrian co-founded WorkScout, which already has seen great success, being part of both the A4 and Techstars accelerators. And then Adrian also founded something else earlier this year. He was a new father to Baker, and so super excited for Adrian and his family startup. But great. So just wanted to introduce our panelists. And then for those that don't know, my name is John Lataha. I'm a second year here at Duke. I worked in tech startups prior to coming to business school. And then this past summer, I interned at Google on their consumer operations team. But with that, wanted to go ahead and turn the time. We'll love to, Bradley and Adrian, just to both have you, if there's anything I missed, we'd love you to fill in the gaps. And then also would love for you to speak about your companies. And then also what was the impetus that led you to found your different companies. If Bradley, you want to start.
Yeah, cool. And I mentioned it in the chat, but I'd love for as many of you to throw in your videos as possible. So I'm not talking to a bunch of photos, if you guys are in positions to be able to do so. The only gap is I actually started out my career in management consulting at a boutique firm in DC. And the interesting piece of that is I saw what I was billed out to the clients and the difference between that and what I actually brought home. And that was one of the things that was really frustrating. And I think every management consultant at some point feels that, right? You're making like a quarter of what you're billed out at. And when I was freelance consulting, that was a big driver for me, was can I get the money that I was being billed at, right? Without all that overhead of the big company. And I basically found out that I could. And that's why I was able to get that higher hourly rate that I was getting. But the reason I started Mylance was really when living that freelance life myself, for me, it enabled me to start my business and test out a bunch of different business ideas. And for other people, it's spend more time with your family, it's pursue a passion of yours. And I really became fascinated by this different way of working where you could make good money, support yourself and your family, but still pursue one of those passions, maybe starting a business or whatever else it is. And I wanted to give that opportunity to as many people as possible. And that's why I get excited every morning to work on Mylance and enable people that have talent, like I'm sure everyone in this room, to use that to make good money and pursue a passion of theirs.
Awesome. That's super exciting, Bradley, and definitely excited to jump in and hear more about that. Yeah. Adrian, would love to hear about if there's any gaps that I left out in your background, and also what was the impetus that led you to found WorkScout?
Sure. Hey everybody, it's nice to be back in the Duke community. I think so. I finished up my degree at Fuqua in 2011, and I think to me it's really amazing how much technology and technology businesses have advanced over that. I finished up in 2011. Coming up on 9 years. To prep for this, I was going through some of my old business school deliverables and was going over one of the capstone papers that I wrote, which was hypothesizing about whether the iPhone would be able to take down the global dominance of the Symbian operating system that Nokia was coming out with. So, I think it's amazing thinking about how the world looked 9 years ago and what it looks today, and then looking at what we think it's going to be 9 years from now. I think from my perspective, there's no better time to enter the tech world because of businesses like Bradley and me are working on. So really the impetus of WorkScout was my own experience being the COO of a venture-backed startup. And I found that there really wasn't a great way to outsource short-term projects. I could go to an agency for something multi-month. I could, of course, hire a full-time FTE for something more permanent. But as I engaged the online freelancing market, there was not a really great solution for me, kind of looking for projects that are 2 to 6 weeks. I just need to get some stuff going, particularly projects that were outside of my team's skill set. So we're building WorkScout with a real mission in mind, which is really to help tech become a more sustainable career path. Because if we're going to have the same amount of growth of innovation in tech between 2011 and 2020 for the next 9 years, that all of the people that are in tech today burned out on that slog need more help. And I think our mission is really to help tech be more sustainable by being able to outsource those short-term deliverables and focus on more strategic work and do incredible things that I used to do back in my Fortune 500 days, like, I don't know, take a week of vacation, see some family over the weekend, and not have kind of this never-ending slog of deliverables hanging over your head.
Awesome. Thanks for that. Thanks for that introduction to your company, Adrian. Bradley, wanted to jump back to something that you were saying. You know, you started off in consulting and realized the rates that your company was charging for your work. I'd love to hear about. So, you know, you leave Uber. What was the thought process for you for going after that first consulting gig? And love to hear that story and how that eventually turned out.
My experience at Uber, I learned so much, not only from a business perspective, but also what I was capable of doing. I constantly got thrown into go launch this market, go launch this business line. And I just had to figure it out, right? I had really no previous experience. And I learned that I could do it, and I did it pretty well. And I was proud of what I had accomplished. And they actually asked me to go launch another business line, Uber Works, at that time for them. And I applied for it and I interviewed and I got accepted to it, and I was about to do it. And I had actually a call with one of my mentors who said, why are you going to go launch a fourth business line for them? Right? All three business lines are well worth over $1 billion. You clearly have the ability to do this. Why not go do it for yourself? And I'd always wanted to start a company since I was back at Duke in college. And for me, that was kind of the wake up call of it's time to go see if I can do this for myself without the Uber brand, Uber name, and the, you know, venture capital money that they had. And so I quit, and I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do or what business I wanted to start. And I thought, why not make a little bit of money while I'm figuring this out? So the question is then how, you know, you can try and like start a blog or sell an e-commerce product or something like that. And I actually did try those things. I bought a little company and started selling some e-commerce stuff. I played around with it, but I reached out to a few companies on LinkedIn that a lot of them had reached out to me about a role. And I said, look, I'm not willing to join full-time right now, but I can use my experience at Uber to help you out part-time. Is that of interest? And 11 companies said no. And one company said, that sounds interesting. Let's chat about it. And that ended up being, excuse me, my first client. And I kept waiting for that to end, if you will, because I was making great money. I was the expert in the room. It was a lot of fun and empowering and fulfilling. And it was like too good to be true in a way. I was like, this has to end. And it didn't. And I got another client and then another client. And I really saw that this was feasible from a longer term perspective. Like I could still be doing that for my career right now, working half part-time and making great money and just enjoying my life or pursuing something else. Right. You know, I personally don't want to be doing that, but it's a great path for a lot of other people. And it was kind of just taking that leap and asking, hey, can I work part-time? And a lot of people just don't ask for what they want. And then, you know, you don't have a chance of getting it.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. Would love to, first wanted to share something a little bit personal to me. So actually, after I worked with Adrian this past summer, I started thinking, because this is a space I'm passionate about as well, freelancing, and just like Adrian was speaking to, you know, being able to have kind of a more sustainable lifestyle. And so I started thinking, you know, obviously being in business school, we're kind of tight on money. And so I thought, what are ways that I could freelance? And the first thing that I thought was, you know, I keep tabs with my old companies, and at one of my companies, one of the people had left, reached out to them, said, hey, we're wondering if you need extra hands. And they're like, you know what, actually we do. And then they're like, what are you charging per hour? And I didn't know what to say. I kind of just threw out a random number, and they're like, okay, that sounds fair. So,
That's awesome.
and so I've been working with them a little bit. But one thing that really caught my attention, Bradley, when I was on your website on Mylance, you were talking about how you threw out this number, 287 per hour, and then you eventually settled on 250. Would love to hear about just what made you choose that 287 number.
As you said, I had no idea either, right? They said, what's your rate? Give us a proposal. And I had to make something up. So I did a calculation based on compensation at Uber, including equity and how that had increased over time, the benefits that Uber gave me and all of that, packaged it together, threw in let's just say I work 40 hours at Uber, which no chance in hell, but let's say I did, then what would that number be? And I wanted it to be specific. So even though I had made it up, it appears calculated, right? If you go to someone with $300 an hour, it's bullshit, right? It's clear that you made that up. Whereas if you go with a specific number, it's defensible, even if you don't need to defend it proactively, right? So I did a calculation. It looked super high to me, but I figured same kind of thing. What's the worst that happens? That they laugh me out of the room and say that's ridiculous and move on, right? And they came back to say, yeah, that's a little high. You know, we could do 250. And for me, that was hell yeah, let's do it, right? That was a great number. So it's kind of one of those things, you know, shoot for the stars, and you never know what'll happen, right? So I shot for it and it worked out.
Awesome. Awesome. And then that kind of leads me to a question I had for you, Adrian, because when you spoke to making tech more sustainable, we'd love to hear your perspective, especially because you kind of have seen both sides, like working, you know, at established, you know, Fortune 500 companies, and then also working for high growth startups where, you know, you're probably working crazy. Well, you know, it's a different kind of workload. The workload can be pretty crazy in both worlds. But we'd love to hear about how you see freelancing helping to make tech more sustainable, and then helping, you know, people pursue their passions, like Bradley was speaking to, not just in their 9 to 5, but also outside of work.
Sure. So I think the first thing I want to talk about is the career paths that like our parents' generation talk about and think about are very different than the opportunities that we have in front of us. So my mom just recently retired as a school superintendent. Like that was a career that was like be a teacher and then be an assistant principal and then like be an assistant superintendent and then try to get like that head job.
Wow.
And I think for better or worse, it's unlikely that anybody in this meeting will have a career like that for the next 30 years. I think that like just thinking about typical large companies that recruit on campus, like you could work for a Microsoft, you could work for a Cisco, you could work for an Apple. But chances are there's going to be a time in that, you know, in your time at that company where either you're pushed away from the company or you're pulled to something else. So I just want to kind of normalize that and say our careers are going to be looking very different. You know, we're at Duke, so we're like, there's a bunch of very high achieving people in this room. And I just want to acknowledge that it's a little uncomfortable thinking about, shit, I don't know what the next 5 years of my life are going to look like. And was like a big barrier for me leaving Fuqua, because I was at a consulting company where I kind of knew how to do the job, and I really pushed myself to join industry. So I think, John, the way that I would talk about that question is to say, like, are you ready to accept that your career will be kind of a bit of a quilt of some sort, where you have the agency to actually make your own experience? And I think that once you accept that, the question is, what are the credentials that I need in order to be able to kind of hang my own shingle, so to speak? I think that Bradley did an awesome job talking about how he was able to translate his work at Uber in order to have the lifestyle that he is looking for. And I think that everybody on this call should be thinking about that, because like you guys are going to be able to work for like some of the best companies in the entire world. And I think the question is, why are you doing that? I think that there's very good reasons to do that, but it's also thinking ahead and being open to new opportunities.
Awesome. Thanks, Adrian. And then I had, you know, some other questions, but before we move on, wanted to see if anyone in the audience had a question. Quinn, thanks for turning on your camera. Feel free to ask any questions that you might have, or if you can come off mute or you can chat it in, whichever you prefer. But yeah, let's see. Looks like we have. Yeah, Weston, you want to go ahead?
Curious. Oh.
You can go, Quinn.
Yeah, Bradley, I was curious. So maybe I just missed it in something you were saying, but the first opportunity you had there was kind of ad hoc. It was somebody reaching out to you for more full-time. You said, what about part-time? And then from there, you said the opportunities kind of kept rolling in to your surprise. Were they weren't all coming from a single source or anything? It was just, yeah. How did you keep sourcing these different opportunities, and what was your pitch to them, or what was your offering to them to make it keep working?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I tapped into my network. I used some of the platforms that exist today. I found a project on Catalent, which I can't really say I recommend, but it did work out for one project for me. But it was really through my network. It was folks that knew me, had worked with me. As you mentioned, John, right? You went back to a past company you'd worked at. They already know you. So the pitch for you to help them out is pretty easy. And so I did the same thing, right? Folks that I had worked with. And what I really meant by those opportunities kept rolling in was the value that I could bring as far as what they were willing to pay. And they saw that value I could bring to them. So the $20,000 a month that I was making initially, that kept going. That was what was so surprising to me. Not necessarily that I could find clients, but that I could find them at such high value. And then as far as projects, it was a lot leaning on the experience, specifically at Uber Freight. So the freight world is incredibly antiquated. It's enormous, and it's going through over the last 5-10 years, this tech transition. And Uber Freight is a big part of that. And there's very few folks that actually have the freight knowledge and experience. It's such a different industry that most people know nothing about, combined with the tech experience in the Silicon Valley or any kind of startup experience. And so combining those two, I was fairly a rare breed, if you will, where these older tech companies would love to say, oh my God, how are you thinking about this in a totally new way? Or the startup company saying, we have freight experience and we're starting this new thing, but we have no idea how to bring it to market. We don't know how to raise venture money. We don't know how to scale this business, if you will. And so I use that sweet spot to really say, look, I'm going to come in and work with you. For the pre-seed seed companies, who's working directly with the founders or leadership teams to say, hey, how are we really going to do this? For the more established companies, I worked with a Series D company, and they wanted to really take their offering to the next level from their shipper point of view, actually. So that was working with obviously a much smaller team within the organization. But yeah, I mean, it was leveraging my logistics and sometimes food delivery experience and helping them just grow and scale strategically. And, I was always on the operations side. So that's the type of experience I brought.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks for that question, Quinn. Weston, did you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yes, sorry, technical difficulties coming on off mute there. So this is a question for both of you. When transitioning to freelance, I see a few factors that were maybe working in both of your favor. One of them being you had good experience beforehand, like you actually know something going into freelance. You can't just advertise yourself as someone capable of doing work that you.
Oh, looks like you cut out, Weston.
Can you hear me?
There you
go. Yeah, so basically the three things I see working in both of your favors that I would hoping to hear your thoughts on are you had good experience, you had a good brand recognition, name recognition, and then you also have a network. And I'm wondering what you guys felt of those three things. Which of them is more important and which of them do you think is like less necessary to successfully transition to freelance?
Kick us off, Adrian.
Yeah. A lot of stuff I know now that I wish I knew 10 years ago. So I'll talk a little bit more about credentials. I view like a Duke MBA as a credential. I view like working for Uber as a credential. The credentials that you need to be successful in the startup world are like very, very different than the credentials that, again, like our parents are like, hey, go to X and Y school and go be a lawyer because that's a sustainable job path. To us, like there are these new credentials that you kind of only learn by participating in them. So I think that Twitter, there's a lot to say about Twitter, but I think that there's an argument that the discussions happening on Twitter and the ability to be able to interact with people and learn things is actually kind of underrated. I think LinkedIn in the same way, that I think that if you were to talk to somebody 25 years ago and be able to say, like, I can reach out to anybody that I want, and if there's a clear ask, that there's a good chance that somebody will get back to you. A good example, last night, I just like sent a message to one of the co-founders of Roman. He got back to me this morning. And it's not because like I have some brand name and people know who I am. It's because you learn a skill of engaging people online. So I think that that's very, very important. I think the other thing that I want to highlight is, like, John did a very nice job of talking through my and Bradley's background. I'll just talk for myself for a second. I did not do all that stuff on purpose. Like, you can tell a nice story about your career in hindsight, but in each of those stops along the way, I was freaking out about, well, like, I don't want to fuck up my resume. You know what I mean? And I would just encourage everybody to, and I'd encourage myself 10 years ago, to just relax about what you're doing today and what it means for tomorrow and the next day. And instead spend time to say, like, what is the work that I really, really love to do? And I think that that passion and that excitement is something that's very, very hard to fake. But I think that once you find that, you get a lot closer to something that feels like a very genuine, handcrafted career path, an opportunity that we have in our generation that our parents didn't have previously. Okay, to you, Bradley.
I love that answer, Adrian. So I'll just second that. The point I'll hit on is, I think, yes, my experience speaks for itself and is definitely helped me find clients. At the same time, without presenting it in a really tangible, specific way, I don't think it's nearly as helpful, right? I mean, if I go to a potential client and say, oh yeah, I've done operations at Uber and that's the value I bring to you as a company, nobody has any idea what that means. That's useless, right? And a lot of the work we do with our customers is to say very specifically, as narrow as possible, where can you add value and where have you done well in your career? And we do that with listing out what are the top accomplishments you've done in your career, and then what are the skills you have specifically that enabled you to do that. And sometimes that exercise for people is incredibly eye-opening, right? Because the imposter syndrome is real for all of us. We all feel like we're not really sure what we're capable of. And then you list out those things that you've done. Even if I had done that after 2 years of management consulting, I could have crafted that experience to write pretty well. And I might have been able to get clients based on that alone, right? And I was servicing clients as a 24-year-old as a management consultant, right? Like, why not? And so it's not just about the brand name or who you know, and that definitely helps. But I've seen people go out there and be successful freelance consultants without that brand name, without that great network, because they do a great job presenting themselves specifically and tangibly to a client. And that's where, if I were you guys, if you're looking to do this, even as a job or a consultant, is really nailing how you brand yourself personally.
Yeah, just to add on to that I think that your resume helps you get the first 1 or 2 jobs. My co-founder Lindsay and I have done a lot of research in the freelancing industry, and mainly focusing on clients. But one of the really interesting things that we learned is how important reviews are. Now that sounds like a throwaway line, like we all look at reviews when we're trying to buy like holiday presents on Amazon. But like, moving forward, I think if you're a client and you have a choice between like a Harvard MBA with like no reviews, and you have like a choice between like a freelancer that lives in Idaho with 100 reviews, 5 stars, I think it's pretty clear who you're going to select. So I think that the background that you bring will only get you so far. And it's really delivering a lot of value to those first few clients and getting them loving your service and getting them referring to you. That's really where the rubber meets the road.
Awesome. Thanks for those answers. I really loved the stories that you both shared. Bradley, love how you talked about, not just having the skills, having the network, but being able to sell yourself and really, clearly define your positioning. And then Adrian, love what you said. It reminded me of what I was thinking, the other day. When I was thinking about LinkedIn and how like things look on your LinkedIn profile, and if you have like a shorter work like stint at a company, it like doesn't look as good as other. But then I started thinking like, oh, but that's silly to think like, oh, I want to do this just because it looks better on my LinkedIn or whatever, as opposed to what you're saying about finding, work that's fulfilling, finding work that you feel valued at. But awesome. Thanks for sharing that. And Maren, I wanted to go ahead and see if you still had a question. I saw that your hand was raised.
Yes, well, I think they partially answered it. Thank you for hosting this. This is quite interesting. What I wanted to ask actually was, as the nature of work changes and it evolves, what are some of the downsides of going into freelancing, as well as it almost seems like the upside is you get the benefit of control of your time and everything that comes with entrepreneurship with a bit more security. What is the downside of doing this long term?
I'll start. I think you actually get less security, right? Because if you're full-time employed, you have that stable income, you know how much you're receiving each month, and you know that's coming unless you were to get laid off. But for the most part, it's coming. Freelance, you don't, right? You're going to have up and down months. I had 1 month with 40 grand in revenue and 1 month with 5, right? And that's just the nature of being a consultant. The challenges are taxes are not withheld for you, so you need to do more work on that end. Health insurance is usually tied to your employer almost always, and so you need to find a solution for that, which is doable to find one. It's just expensive. And pretty much everything that goes along with running your own business, you need to take on as a freelancer. And the research shows about 50% of every freelance consultant's time is spent doing admin activities like bookkeeping, taxes, lead gen, invoicing, legal contracts. And so if you think about that burden that your employer would normally take on for you, yes, you get the flexibility and freedom and you're your own boss and choose your own clients and all of the benefits. But we always make sure to call out with our clients, let's not paint this as just the silver bullet of fulfilling work. There are challenges that come along with it that you need to be ready to sign up for and take on. And I think that as everything matures from a consultant perspective, companies like ours and Adrian's and other companies tackling these admin pieces will reduce that burden. And you'll be able to sign up for a platform that just takes on the stuff for you and you can focus on your work. But we're definitely not there today. And so you have to take on that burden yourself for now.
Yeah, awesome, Bradley. Like I +1 on all of that. I think the freelancing life requires you to do tasks that your old W-2 employer would do for you. I think the major one is lead gen. That you might be a great graphic designer, but that doesn't mean that you're a good salesperson. And that's not a good or a bad thing. That's just like the reality that intelligence is not universal. So I think that for people thinking about beginning freelancing, it's more of like a gut check. Like, am I comfortable with kind of faking it till I make it on some of these ancillary business tasks that I'm going to have to do for myself? I think the interesting thing about what we're building at WorkScout is that all of our projects are pre-scoped. So really the experience for a freelancer is looking at our catalog, looking at our inventory of projects, and just signing up to work them. And by signing up, it's just, hey, I can do this work, and here's how much I want to do it. And I think in that way, one of the primary things that we're solving at WorkScout is this lead gen problem. Because instead of the experience on Upwork or Fiverr today, where you need to email with all these inbound leads and how do I spend my time between lead gen and doing the work, the experience on our platform for freelancers is just work hitting your inbox. So I think if you just think about our business strategy for a second, that's one thing that Lindsay and I have built into our platform, to say we are creating value for you freelancers, so that when you do have to pay a platform fee to us, you're actually getting some value out of that. And I think that that's a big thing that competitors of ours, particularly the larger ones, are going to have to face at some point in the near future, which is we just can't be sort of a marketing channel for freelancers. Like, that's not creating enough value in a world where anybody can begin developing their own platform.
Okay,
Awesome.
thank you.
Awesome. Thanks for that question, Maren. Yeah, those answers brought up so many, so many different topics that, just speaking about the challenges that freelancers face. Just a kind of a side note, my wife does some freelance work, and she does it through one of these marketplaces, one of these platforms. When, California passed the law at the beginning of the year, basically, she's on these forums, and a lot of the contractors out in California were struggling to be able to find work because of it. So it's a crazy, another hot topic. But before talking about that, we'd love to hear more about kind of shift going from the freelancer side, looking at the employer side, looking at companies. Adrian, we'd love to hear about kind of the trends that you see in the industry of companies beginning to use freelancers or use contractors more, and how do you see that trending, through the pandemic, and maybe like there are things that have happened in the pandemic that may change that dynamic, indefinitely. We'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Sure. I think let's first segment like employers into two groups. You have group A, which are employers that are looking at changes in how work is done from an offensive standpoint, that how can I build this as an advantage for my company, both for customers and employees. There's a second group, which I think is much larger, which is, hey, I'm just holding my nose through this work from home period because I don't really trust my employees to be working from home. I want everybody to come into the office, and that allows me to exert some level of control. So I'm just going to talk about A, because I think that B is just, those are companies that are going to be dying at some point in the near future. I think that one of the things that will be a reality for these company A's are that over time, the line will blur between full-time W-2, part-time W-2, and freelancer/contractor. And it's going to be all about what are the outcomes that you can deliver for my company. One of the things we're doing on WorkScout to help kind of accelerate this a bit is some UX changes that we're making. Rather than saying, hey, we have marketing projects, we have finance projects, we're talking about the outcomes that clients will get by buying these kind of prepackaged deliverables. So what's exciting to me about this is, as the CEO of a company, thinking about a world where I don't buy labor in terms of hours, I buy labor in terms of outcomes. And you might say, like, that sounds like really bad for the freelancers. And I think that it is like not so great for people that kind of like hide at their desk and, aren't really doing a great job. But I think that it's amazing for freelancers that really know what they're doing, because the number one thing that we hear from freelancers about our WorkScout model is, we love that you're not hourly based, because it doesn't take me a lot of hours to do that because I'm really good at that task. So I get to be paid for the value that I create and not be compensated as a function of units of time. So there's a lot there in what I said, but I really do think that these company A's are going to be accelerating growth because of a new flexible way of thinking about work.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for that answer, Adrian. I definitely, one thing that I noticed when I was working at Google this past summer is that they really use a lot of contractors. I mean, they're public companies, so I bet you could look it up. Um, but it's obviously beneficial to contractors, beneficial to freelancers, but also to employers to be able to, as you said, quickly scale up their operations or scale down depending on how the business is doing. Kind of have that flexibility within their business. Would love to hear, Bradley, any thoughts that you have on this topic, kind of a macro level. Um, if you think employers will increasingly move towards hiring freelancers.
I think there always be a need for employees. I don't see this workforce as ever being a majority freelancers per se, but especially with the year that we've had with COVID and the impact on businesses that's been so up and down, right? And businesses are really seeing that you can bring someone on that's really talented and they may be more expensive each month, let's say, but you're only committing to them for 3, 4, 5 months and get that expertise to bring in house. Whereas to bring that person on for a few years, right, is such a bigger just investment. So can you bring in someone that shares the expertise with you from Uber or wherever else, and then your team goes to execute on that in the future? And that ends up being a way better investment over time versus bringing that person on full time. The other piece is you might not be able to get that person full time, right? You can't recruit that kind of talent that you really need. And so you say, okay, fine, we'll bring you on for 10 hours a week and at least pick your brain for 3 months or something like that. So I think we've seen, given the macro trends of this year, more companies embrace this flexible working style to get the expertise in-house. And I don't see that, definitely not fully reversing. It may go back a little bit more once things steady off over the next few years. But we've seen freelancing as a percentage of the workforce up and to the right for the last 10 years. And it's, in my opinion, only continuing in that same direction. So, and to give people numbers, it makes up 6% of the US GDP right now, right? It's over $1 trillion a year. It's enormous. People a lot of folks don't realize how big it is. And of Gen Z, 50% of them are freelancing. So if we think about as the workforce continues to move forward and those folks that are young, early 20s now go into their mid-late 20s, I think only more and more are going to be freelancing. And we could be looking at 50, 60% of the US workforce freelancing over the next 5-10 years, which you're talking about tens of millions of people. So
yeah, it's really interesting thinking about the career path for a freelancer and the ability to work across multiple companies. I know that when I was a management consultant, that was a big reason why we put up with all of the less glamorous things about the industry that, McKinsey and Bain aren't telling you on their sale days. You know what I mean? And it's like, I maybe don't have to work 100 hours a week and not be allowed to talk to the client and have multiple layers of bureaucracy within the consulting firm. And I can actually choose the companies that I want to spend my time learning about and working for. It's like taking the packaging off of a consulting company, and there are downsides. Like I talked a lot about lead gen, but the upside is that if you are somebody that's motivated by mission-driven companies, you can actually make your own career in your own niche and get those network effects of each incremental project you work in that industry makes you incrementally more desirable for that next project. To me, that just feels very exciting.
Awesome. Yeah, just another side story, but as I said, I've been very passionate about this topic, and it also starts with one of my best friends who started freelancing a couple of years ago, and we were just chatting the other day, and he said he bought Jazz, moved from Utah, and so he bought season tickets for the Utah Jazz. So we'll see how that goes in the 2020 NBA season. But I was like, what, you bought season tickets? He's like, yeah, I bought 4 for my consulting business because, I can take clients to go watch the Jazz games. And I was like, oh, that is so awesome. Awesome side benefit of having your own freelancing business. But just going off of what you were saying, Adrian, about, being able to kind of take off the layers and kind of gain that incremental value for yourself.
I'm from Boston, so I'm gonna have an obnoxious sports fan moment. Go Celtics, baby!
Oh yeah.
Sorry,
Hey,
back to you, John.
no, they're looking good this year. Don't get me started on the NBA. Love talking basketball, and of course, Bradley was a Duke alum, so he was a Cameron crazy as well. But awesome, yeah. Would love to kind of shift gears. We have about 12 minutes left. We'd love to shift gears and talk about the dynamics of starting a company and raising capital, joining these different incubators. I know that you guys have had great success thus far. But would first love to start off talking about marketplaces, because this is something that's pretty interesting to me, and both of you have great experience with marketplaces. And Bradley, would love to hear your experience working at Uber and launching these different businesses. A lot of times marketplaces are viewed as a chicken and egg problem. Do you get the supply side or the demand side first? And we'd love to hear kind of your thoughts on that and how you saw that play out at Uber.
Great question. So there's obviously, I could talk about this for hours, right? I mean, this is a big topic, but there's two takeaways that I really like to share with folks that they may not think about quite as much. One thing is Uber, when we launched a new market, whether it's food delivery or the rides business, we started in a very concentrated area. And that enabled us to win, specifically in the rides business, where you guys all know Durham and Raleigh well. I was managing and launched those markets. When we launched in Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill, we launched in a few mile radius of just downtown Raleigh. And Lyft launched an hour after us. So literally the exact same time. And they launched in the entire triangle, Durham, Chapel Hill, and Raleigh. And within 6 months, we had 90% market share of the entire triangle. And the learning for us was we launched very discreetly where our user experience was amazing, right? You could get a car in under 3 minutes in downtown Raleigh when we launched. And because they launched in this big geo, their ETAs were more like 15 minutes. So even though we were later to expand to Durham and Chapel Hill, our user experience was so much better that even though they had this first mover advantage, let's say in Durham and Chapel Hill, we quickly beat them in those markets. And then we would do the same on the food delivery side. So anytime you're thinking about starting with a marketplace in more of this freelancer space, it's going super niche, right? It's saying we need as much liquidity as possible and to do really good matching. I'd love to hear Adrian's reaction to this. But maybe we start out with only 1 or 2 or 3 types of projects versus saying we're going to service every project, right? Because you're just not going to create a good user experience, most likely, if you do that. So that's number one. Number two is challenge yourself on which is the supply side of your market. Because in each different business line that I worked at Uber, on the rides business, it was drivers. On the eats business, it was restaurants. And on the freight business, it's actually shippers. It's not drivers on the freight space. And the supply side is always the harder to acquire side. And so in the rides business, we would just subsidize drivers, right? We just paid them to get on the road and just sit there. On the eat side, we needed 100 restaurants signed onto our platform in order to launch in a very tight geo. So we really spent the time and investment to get restaurants. And on the freight side, I actually think we grew slower because we prioritized the carrier side first, and we shouldn't have. We should have prioritized the shipper side. We didn't ask ourselves hard enough, which is the supply side of this business. And we only learned really 1.5 years, 2 years in, that we really need to go build technology for shippers, not necessarily carriers. So it's an interesting thing that people don't think about. They just think they know the supply side of their business. So when someone asks me, how's the supply side of your business going? I always ask them what they mean, right? Because it might mean everyone thinks it's obvious, and I would really challenge that.
Awesome. Yeah, Adrian, would love to hear kind of your reaction to that, your thoughts on marketplaces. Obviously you have experience with Zipcar, with and then building a marketplace with WorkScout.
Yeah, so I'm just pasting 2 links into the group chat. There are people a lot smarter than me that have talked about this topic. So one is a great overview of how kind of famous startups have scaled marketplaces, and another one is a Substack all around how startups got their first 1,000 customers. I think to challenge myself to bring an original idea to this question, I think the thing that's very difficult at an early stage company is focus. And like, it's really hard because when you're working off a white sheet of paper, there's so much you want to do. But I'd really encourage anybody thinking about an early stage business to put artificial constraints on yourself. And like, what do I mean by that? Specifically, what I mean is that challenge yourself to think, what is the one use case that my company can solve better than anybody else? Because even like a company like WorkScout that's operating in this $1 trillion market, there are things that like little old us can do better than large post-IPO companies. And by the way, this is just another way to talk about the innovator's dilemma. So the key here is, what is a hole in the market that you have the unique ability to address? And guys, like that, this sounds really hard, and I have bad news for you. It's really damn hard, because you have like the headwind of, I want to do everything, I'm so passionate. And then the headwind of, nobody knows who I am. How do I even get one customer to visit my site? But I bring it up to say, this is the challenge ahead as you're thinking about early stage startups. And I think just like a plug for co-founders, if anybody's trying to do this alone, there's a good chance that you're more talented than me. I frankly, I couldn't do it alone, because I know myself so well at this point in my career. I know my blind spots. So I'd really encourage people to think about, what are my blind spots and how can I build a core founding team that's complementary and that can help each other remind themselves of this one core to do. What is the one use case that we can do better than anybody else?
Awesome. Thanks for that, Adrian. And then would love to also hear your thoughts on, we just have a few minutes left, but I just was really impressed going through both of your companies, the different incubators and accelerators that your companies were a part of, and would love to hear you speak a little bit to that experience. Kind of what was your experience in those accelerators? What do you feel like you got out of it? How did that help your company strategy? And maybe Bradley, you could start with On Deck.
Yeah, and to give a background, On Deck is a 12-week fellowship. It's pretty unstructured, as in they do a few sessions per day with different experts in different fields, and you essentially choose which sessions you want to attend. There's no equity portion of it. It's just a cash fee to join it. You have to get accepted. And the reason that I did it, I got referred to it by a friend who said, I highly recommend this for you. And the reason I did it is because when you're starting a company, it's so challenging to grind it out, especially in the first few months of getting started. You don't have customers, you don't have any positive feedback. You have to just push yourself every single day to take a step forward. And some days you really don't want to, and you become unmotivated, and it really is such a grind. And you're not surrounded by anyone either, right? It's just you. And that's to Adrian's point of getting a co-founder, because it makes all the difference in the world. But I didn't have one at that time. And so I thought, I'm going to go through On Deck. And at that point, I think it was $1,300. And if I get even the motivation of that talented, passionate group of people, that will be worth my money, right? If I don't meet anyone, if I don't get any specific advice, which of course I ended up getting, and I definitely think it was worth it. But I was surrounded by 150 people, passionate, hardworking, starting companies, innovating, moving the needle every day. And that just pushed me to want to be better. And so I think, very different experience than Adrian's. And I'd love to get his thoughts on his accelerator that he went through. But, it was great for me to be part of that group.
Cool. Yeah. Strong opinion alert. So if anybody doesn't want to hear me rant for a couple minutes, that would be a good time to exit the meeting. I don't know On Deck. It seems very impressive. So I'm not saying anything about On Deck. I'm just saying about my own experiences. I think for those that don't have networks within the startup world, it's really hard to kind of do the old school networking thing. What are people doing that I went to college with? What are people doing that I used to work with? Like if you're a career changer like me, you don't really have a lot of those people. So what I view these accelerators for are less that it's a really like rapid way to build your company. It wasn't that case for Lindsay and I. What it was an additional credential. So when I talk to a VC and they could talk to a million other wannabe companies like mine, the fact that we've been through 2 recognizable programs really, really helps. Because in the early days, you don't really have customers, you don't really have a site that you're proud of. Like you kind of need to mine for what do I have and how can I translate what I have to make me look a little bit bigger, a little bit more attractive than maybe what I am today. So yeah, so that's kind of my general point of view. I would just hold your nose and apply and go through these things, but look at it less for company building and more, how can I create a new network around the company that I'm building?
Awesome. Awesome. Thanks, Adrian. Yeah, that was super. So just, I know we talked a little bit about Twitter before, and I follow like a lot of people on Twitter that eventually ended up going through OnDeck. So that was super exciting to see Mylance on OnDeck. And then last year I took an entrepreneurial finance class here at Fuqua, and actually we had a case where one of the companies went through Techstars. And so that was like when I was doing my mentor study with Adrian and WorkScout this past summer, it was cool to see, you know, the process that they're going through to eventually go to A4 and the Techstars. Cool. And so, you know, we're just coming up on time, but wanted to take just a few seconds just to get your thoughts on how can Fuqua students get involved with your companies. I know that you guys have offered mentor studies in the past. Not sure if it's going to be offered in the future. You know, if you guys want to shout out any tags to any handles to follow you at, that works as well.
I don't recommend following me because I think that there's a lot of other people that generate better content. To be frank, I would just say, like, don't be shy. Like, I think to really get the career that you want in tech, you need to have very thick skin and get used to hearing no a lot more than yes, because that's kind of the core job of a founder. I think the one thing that I would say is definitely reach out to as many people as you can, but have a very clear ask. Like, I may not be excited to spend 30 minutes with you on the phone if I don't know like exactly what you want to talk about. Not that I'm the super important person, but I just want to make sure that you get the value out of the conversation that you have with me. So I think just having one very specific ask really, really helps with kind of cold networking and outreach.
Same thing. Don't be shy. And to back up Adrian's point, do your research, right? If you want to talk about my experience, don't say, hey, I'd love to talk about your experience. Say, I'd love to learn how you launched Uber Freight and what you learned in that process so that I can do X, Y, Z, right? Do your homework, be specific, and make, you know, someone's more likely to take their time, myself included, if you have a specific ask and do your research. So we'll just back up that.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Adrian and Bradley. This was super, it was very informative for me to learn more about the freelancing industry, and then also just hearing your experiences as tech founders, as startup founders was really enlightening. So thanks so much.
Yeah. Thanks for having us. It's great.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
And also thanks everyone who joined. We'll be posting this this recording later on in our tech channel.
Cool. Thanks, John.
Thanks so much.
Nice job.